behind governments, multinationals, and the headlines that spin the world, there is an invisible web of influences that is rarely mentioned in public. For centuries, many believed that a single secret society pulled the strings of humanity's fate, an omnipresent, silent, and absolute organization. However, as documents leak, symbols repeat, and global events follow an enigmatic pattern, a new hypothesis begins to emerge. What if true power is not in the hands of a single group, but the result of a silent war between various hidden orders? Orders that, in essence, do not share the same goals, but compete for invisible territories, shape ideologies, and imprint their marks on the planet's greatest decisions. Governments fall, economies collapse, and entire cultures are reconfigured, all under the veil of normalcy. But if what we see is only the surface, who are those fighting in the shadows? Welcome to another night, where mysteries never sleep. I'm Midnight, and this is 7 Nights. Before we begin, I want to ask for your help. Like the video, comment, and subscribe to the channel. It's just one click, but it makes a huge difference for YouTube to deliver the videos to more people, and for me to keep bringing this content to you. I'm counting on you. Let's get into the video. Have you ever heard the idea that a single group, a kind of invisible elite, is behind everything that happens in the world? Crises, wars, financial collapses, all supposedly commanded by the same hands. It's a seductive concept, a single hidden villain that explains the chaos. But what if that's just part of the smokescreen? Because when you start digging a little deeper, when you observe the subtle lines behind historical events and the traces left by certain institutions, something starts to feel different. The evidence does not point to a single absolute power. On the contrary, it reveals a silent war waged in the shadows between various secret orders, each with its own worldview, its symbols, its alliances. And that changes the game completely. Orders like Freemasonry, the Rosicrucians, the Bavarian Illuminati, and the Jesuits always appear in these contexts. But what few realize is that they never formed a single united front. Each emerged in a different context with distinct goals. Some tied to rationalism, others to occultism, others to religious expansion. And when their paths cross, there is no cooperation. There is conflict. Want a clear example? The Freemasons defended freedom of thought and a break from clerical power. The Jesuits, deeply rooted in Catholic tradition, sought exactly the opposite, to preserve the Church's influence over culture and politics. Now think, could these two groups operate together? Or would they be competing, infiltrating different power structures, trying to win this silent dispute for the future of humanity? This repeats throughout history. Schools, universities, governments, all were, at some point, targets of disputes between these orders. And I'm not talking about loose theories. I'm talking about records. Disputes over school curricula, influence over kings and presidents, control of institutions. Each symbolic victory reflected real changes. A war of influence, constant, invisible, but devastating. And the symbols? The symbols are not there by chance. Triangles, eyes, compasses, stars, roses. They are engraved on public buildings, hidden in company logos, inserted in films, in banknotes. Some see this as coincidence. But when these symbols repeatedly appear connected to powerful figures and turning points in history, it's hard to ignore. Could these marks be silent declarations? As if each group were saying, "Here, it's our presence that dominates." What's most intriguing is how each of these orders acts in different areas. One invests heavily in education and politics, another in the economy and banking. Still others focus on culture, the arts, the entertainment industry. Isn't it strange to realize that the world's great changes almost always begin in these same sectors? And then comes the inevitable question: if a single order were in control, why so many contradictions in the directions the world takes? Why do we see cycles of liberal progress followed by conservative waves? Why the alternation between globalism and nationalism, between technological revolution and revival of ancient traditions? This all sounds more like a relay of influence than a linear plan. Take the example of major influential families like the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers. Each acts differently. While one focuses on finance and the old continent, the other expanded through oil, industry, and healthcare. Do they walk together? Or do they represent different fronts of the same hidden war? And when we get to the 21st century, the dispute becomes even more sophisticated. Today, control is no longer just over physical territories. Now it's about the territory of ideas. Algorithms, social networks, artificial intelligence. Whoever controls the flow of information controls collective thought. And whoever controls collective thought controls the future. Perhaps that's why it's more comfortable to believe in a single villain. It gives the feeling that if we expose that enemy, everything will be resolved. But what if we are surrounded by multiple forces in constant conflict, each trying to pull the world in a different direction, silently, without leaving easy traces? What we're seeing may not be the result of a unified plan, but rather the reflection of an endless war, a hidden dispute, where each group wants to rewrite the rules of the world in its own way. And most people don't even notice. Now tell me, if so many hidden forces are fighting for control, who is really winning this war right now? Few people know, but the rivalry between occult orders is neither recent nor discrete. It is intertwined with the greatest events in history, although it is rarely officially acknowledged. What is taught in schools and appears in books usually presents a clean narrative, with clearly defined winners and losers. But what is never told is who is behind the scenes, influencing decisions and manipulating outcomes. And when you start putting this puzzle together, you realize that some pieces simply don't fit the official version. One of the most emblematic cases involves the Knights Templar. Their meteoric rise during the Crusades, accumulating land, military power, and financial influence, turned them into a force so great it became threatening. Officially, they were accused of heresy and wiped out by the Church. But what if that destruction was, in fact, orchestrated by a rival order that wanted to take their place? After all, what could trouble a religious power so much that it would destroy them so brutally, if not a direct dispute for spiritual and economic dominance? The dissolution of the Templars was not the end. Many believe that part of them survived and reorganized under new forms. Some say their spiritual heirs were the Rosicrucians, others point to Freemasonry. But what really matters is what came next, a sequence of secret movements competing for space within monarchies, revolutions, and empires. The French Revolution, for example, was celebrated as the triumph of reason over tyranny. But documents and accounts suggest it was also the stage for a symbolic war between factions with opposing visions of power. And they weren't just political visions. This battle intensified in the 19th century. While the Freemasons aligned themselves with figures like George Washington and influenced the founding of the United States with symbols and structures based on their principles, the Jesuits returned strongly to the Church, seeking to reclaim the space they had lost. It didn't take long for clashes to arise. Disputes over influence on kings, the clergy, and public education. The war was no longer over geographical territories, but over mindsets. And this is where things get even more delicate, because many of these orders do not act directly. They form networks of influence. They create schools, foundations, councils. They shape thinkers, economists, artists. And through these figures, they manage to reconfigure culture. It's no coincidence that certain ideas dominate the world for decades and then suddenly disappear. Someone is pulling the strings behind the scenes. What's curious is how certain historical events coincide with internal ruptures between these orders. In World War I, secret alliances are believed to have directly influenced diplomatic decisions. Documents from the early 20th century reveal meetings between bankers and politicians linked to different esoteric groups. The war, which was officially triggered by nationalist tensions, may have been, in part, an attempt to redistribute power among occult orders in crisis. During World War II, the signs become even more explicit. Nazi symbolism, deeply rooted in occultism and the beliefs of the Thule Society, is not merely aesthetic. It is doctrinal. Meanwhile, on the Allied side, there were strong ties to rival orders. Freemasons in command positions in the US and England, for example, reinforced completely opposing values. The war between nations was also, according to many alternative scholars, a war between secret doctrines. And things didn't stop there. With the Cold War, a new configuration emerged. Now, the dispute was between two global systems, capitalism and communism. But behind the scenes, there was another war, a conflict between occult orders that, even invisible to the average citizen, operated at high intensity. The KGB, for example, used symbols and codes associated with ancient Eastern esoteric schools. Meanwhile, Western think tanks with Masonic ties shaped public opinion and political decisions in the US. These silent battles shaped treaties, maps, alliances. The world wasn't just guided by public leaders and ideologies, but by groups that acted as true strategists, often in total disagreement with one another. And when one of these orders gained ground, the planet felt it. New policies, values, behaviors would emerge. When it lost ground, the pendulum swung back. Even cultural movements carry traces of this conflict. The rise of psychedelic rock in the 60s, counterculture movements, major social revolutions. Many of them were driven by figures close to esoteric orders seeking to break away from the societal model imposed by more traditional groups. None of this happened by chance. The media, as an instrument of influence, was also co-opted. Certain groups realized early on that controlling the narrative was more effective than controlling weapons. Films, books, music, all began to carry subtle messages. Some orders began to compete for space in the collective imagination, shaping beliefs and habits. Have you ever noticed how some ideas seem to appear out of nowhere and suddenly are everywhere? Deep down, what we see is a pattern. Every crisis, every revolution, every leap in consciousness of humanity seems to bear the signature of one of these orders. Not always explicit, but present. And while we keep looking at presidents and parliaments, the real conflict remains out of reach for most. And what if everything we call history is actually the reflection of an invisible war waged between orders that never stopped fighting? Some wars don't need armies to be fought. You only have to look closely in the right places to realize that a dispute is underway, not for physical territory, but for symbolic dominance. In monuments, logos, architecture, cultural productions, and even urban layouts, signs reveal the presence and influence of hidden orders operating in the shadows. These are not artistic coincidences. This is coded language. Symbols like the all-seeing eye, the compass, the eight-pointed star, the crossed rose, the pyramid, all carry ancient meanings. And what's most intriguing is that they continue to appear frequently in places where the fate of societies is decided. Government headquarters, central banks, universities, global corporations. The recurrence is not subtle. In some cases, it's almost provocative. Washington, D.C., for example, displays an urban layout filled with esoteric geometry. This is not a theory. Lines drawn between monuments form angles and figures associated with Masonic symbolism. These same patterns repeat on a smaller scale in other major capitals like Paris, London, and even Brasilia. The inevitable question arises: why replicate the same type of structure, the same alignments, in such distinct places and historical moments? The most accepted explanation among scholars of symbolic architecture is that these configurations are not merely aesthetic, but function as assertions of presence. An order leaves its seal on a region, marking the space as territory under its influence. When another order takes over or tries to challenge that domain, it replaces or overlays those symbols with its own, as if the city were a silent board game, with invisible pieces in constant motion. In Europe, Gothic cathedrals are another powerful example. Some of them, like Chartres and Notre Dame, were built with such mathematical precision that they still impress modern engineers. Alignments with the solstice, proportions based on sacred geometry, sculptures representing universal archetypes. Elements that go beyond the scope of Christian faith. Many of them point to knowledge preserved and applied by occult orders operating parallel to ecclesiastical power. This symbolic dispute is not limited to the past. In recent times, the visual language of major corporations has begun adopting the same elements: subtle triangles, stylized eyes, spirals, labyrinths, obelisks. In global corporate environments, these symbols function almost like marks of ideological affiliation. If they are frequently seen in a company or region, there may well be a symbolic alliance at play. In popular culture, the signs multiply. Films, music videos, album covers, many carry symbolic representations that harken back to ancient doctrines. That in itself wouldn't be significant, if not for the consistency. The same shapes, the same archetypes, repeated by different artists under different labels, but within the same visual logic. Does this point to a coordinated influence? Or is it a form of silent cultural occupation? Among scholars of occult doctrines, there is a consensus. Those who control the symbols shape perception. A symbol can cross generations, influence behavior, fuel entire narratives without the public consciously realizing it. That's why the orders operating in the shadows engage in a cold war for symbolic dominance, far more sophisticated than any military battle. Political changes are also usually accompanied by symbolic shifts. Coats of arms, flags, monuments are changed. Old symbols are removed, replaced by new ones in a process that may seem merely procedural, but in many cases represents the fall of one order and the rise of another. The new symbol is not just a mark of renewal, it's a silent declaration of victory. This pattern repeats in all regions that have undergone abrupt ruptures. Revolutions, coups, deep cultural reforms. In each case, the symbols of one group are erased, those of another take their place, as if each advance of a hidden order were accompanied by the reconstruction of the visual environment. Culture, after all, is also a territory in dispute. The choice of where to place a monument, what shape it will have, what its name will be, all of that takes on new meaning in light of this silent clash. And when multiple orders occupy the same space over time, what many call a fragmented territory emerges, places where different symbolic layers compete for space, without the public realizing they're walking among the marks of different factions. If a symbolic war is underway, the ultimate goal is not just to dominate a city or nation, but to shape collective consciousness. After all, a well-placed symbol can influence far more than a spoken word. It lodges itself in the unconscious, and occult orders have known this for centuries. The question that now arises is, if these orders leave their marks wherever they go, and these marks are everywhere, will they one day want to erase each other's marks by force? There's a common perception that these occult orders operate in isolation, hidden away in secret rituals and silent agendas. But the truth is more complex. None of them operate alone. Each group, to exercise real power, needs allies, people with access, influence, visibility. And that's where the game becomes more sophisticated, because these allies aren't just behind the scenes. They're on camera, on stages, in command chairs. And most people don't even notice. Presidents, ministers, tech magnates, globally renowned artists. Some are merely sympathizers. Others, according to historical records and public connections, are directly linked to these orders. The presence of world leaders at Masonic ceremonies, for example, is no secret. It's documented. At the same time, figures from the Vatican have been associated with closed circles of Jesuit influence. This isn't theory. It's a pattern. Every order needs a structure of influence. Some rely on financial dynasties, others on educational, religious, or cultural institutions. Some operate by shaping laws, while others mold behaviors. The alliance between occult orders and public figures is not merely functional, it's strategic. The ally becomes a bridge between the invisible and the visible, a way to expand the order's reach without exposing its existence. And when these alliances intersect, silent conflicts emerge. A leader aligned with one order might make decisions that seemingly contradict their public ideology. But seen through the lens of this hidden war, they make sense. It's as if they're not governing for themselves, but fulfilling part of a larger agenda. How many times has this happened before our eyes without anyone realizing it? The corporate sector is another fundamental territory on this board. Entire multinationals operate under philosophies that mirror doctrines of specific orders. The way they treat consumers, how they invest, how they respond to crises, all of it may reflect a symbolic alliance. Some of these corporations fund social, cultural, and educational projects that echo the values of the orders they align with. And of course, they directly influence public opinion. In entertainment, the role of allies is even more subtle and more effective. Artists, producers, and directors with access to major platforms end up playing the role of catalysts. Through films, series, music, and events, certain messages are reinforced, while others are erased. The aesthetics, the themes explored, even the symbols used on screen, follow a logic many have already recognized as ritualistic. And when these elements repeat globally across different media, it's hard to believe it's just creative coincidence. There are also those who act as intermediaries, people who move between distinct orders, connecting interests, mediating disputes, or trying to maintain a fragile balance between forces in constant tension. These intermediaries rarely appear in headlines, but their names surface in lists of private meetings, closed-door conferences, and obscure councils. They are figures who, even without formal positions, have more decision-making power than many heads of state. And the most unsettling part, many of these alliances are unstable. What seems like a solid union today may turn into betrayal tomorrow. Because in the world of occult orders, loyalty isn't eternal, it's tactical. When a public figure ceases to be useful, they may be discarded. When an organization loses strength, its allies seek shelter in rival orders. It's an ever-shifting ecosystem, where only those who best adapt to the invisible game survive. There are also alliances between orders with seemingly opposing interests. As improbable as it may seem, at certain moments, rival factions unite out of convenience. Whether to take down a common enemy, manipulate an election, or prevent a public revelation. These unions are temporary, but extremely dangerous, as they bring together forces that, even in isolation, already possess enough power to change the course of a nation. Behind these relationships is always the pursuit of control, not just political or economic, but cultural, spiritual, symbolic. And those who observe the movements closely notice that the allies of occult orders tend to appear in the most critical moments. When a war breaks out, when a new technology spreads, when an idea gains global traction. It is these allies who ensure the game continues, without the public even realizing a game is being played. And so the question remains, if each of these orders has powerful allies scattered across the world, how can we tell when we're looking at a leader or just a messenger? Not all wars begin with bombs. Some begin with quiet meetings, decisions made in silent rooms, and seemingly disconnected moves. The geopolitics the public sees is only the surface. The real game takes place long before the headlines. And in this game, every crisis can be a move, planned with precision. Regional wars, economic collapses, pandemics, abrupt changes in government. Events that, at first glance, seem like the result of chance, human error, or inevitable conflicts. But when analyzed through the right lens, they reveal a disturbing synchronicity. Crises that arise exactly when certain orders begin to lose ground. Global restructurings that benefit specific agendas. Is it coincidence? Or part of a plan executed in the shadows? In 2008, the world watched the collapse of gigantic financial institutions. A crisis that started on Wall Street, but sank economies on the other side of the planet. What few remember is that, shortly after, new power blocks emerged, new economic alliances, new narratives. And certain orders, linked to alternative banking systems, cryptocurrencies, and decentralized doctrines, began to gain strength. The crisis wasn't just a failure. It may have been a silent replacement of dominance. The very creation of digital currencies raised suspicions. While the public saw technological innovation, behind the scenes, esoteric symbols began appearing connected to blockchain projects. Terms like ether, light, quantum cryptography, all with roots in ancient mystical doctrines. The question remains, is this a new order trying to break away from the old financial empire? Or just a new arm of the same structure, adapted to the digital world? Armed conflicts also follow this pattern. Regions that seemingly have no strategic importance suddenly become global epicenters. Leaders fall, populations migrate, treaties are broken. But when analyzing who benefits from these imbalances, a pattern begins to emerge. Certain institutions gain strength. Certain narratives are solidified, and symbols of ancient orders re-emerge, discreetly, behind the scenes of the new power. During pandemics, this pattern repeats. The global mobilization, the synchronized decisions, the centralization of measures, the rise of supranational organizations. All of this raises questions, not about the reality of the disease itself, but about who used the crisis to consolidate power, manipulate data, shape behavior. And when influential figures aligned with certain orders emerge as problem solvers, the question can no longer be ignored. The problem was natural, but was the response planned? Even massive social movements carry this duality. Some arise spontaneously, but are quickly co-opted. Funds are injected, narratives are redirected, influencers appear out of nowhere. In no time, the movement that began with a cause becomes a gear that benefits a specific order. Rebellion becomes a tool. Popular dissatisfaction becomes fuel. And the enemy changes without anyone noticing. Geopolitical maps also reveal this invisible dance. Countries that spend decades under a certain influence suddenly change stance, alliances, doctrines. It's as if the contract expired and another force took over. And right after these changes, new symbols appear, policies aligned with occult doctrines, and partnerships that defy previous logic. No one changes an entire system overnight, unless something greater is behind it. This game, when observed closely, is not chaotic. It's choreographed. Each crisis seems to pave the way for something new, not as a solution, but as a repositioning. One order loses, another takes over. And the public, with no access to the board, believes everything is disorder, bad luck, or incompetence. But the most dangerous part is the normalization of this dynamic. With each new crisis, people become used to the idea that there's always a new beginning, without questioning who is behind that new beginning. And when the pattern repeats too many times, it can no longer be ignored. This is not chance. This is strategy. So the question that now arises is, how many of the crises that shaped the world were truly inevitable, and how many were just the next move in a war no one sees? For centuries, these occult orders have operated in the shadows, disputing territory, symbols, and allies. Always discreetly, silently. But there are signs that this war is about to stop being silent. Something is changing, and those who watch closely can feel it. In recent years, the movements of these orders have become bolder. Certain symbols that were once hidden now appear openly. In award shows, public speeches, advertising campaigns, the veil that once concealed the presence of these factions seems to be gradually lifting. And not by accident. When symbols no longer hide, it means the conflict is entering another phase. Global structures are shifting far too quickly. Former allies are falling out. Trust in centuries-old institutions is crumbling. Politicians, entrepreneurs, artists, all seem to be playing on different sides of a board the public still can't see. But the pieces are already moving, and there's no turning back. Artificial intelligence, mass data control, integrated surveillance systems, all of this has amplified the influence capacity of occult orders. Now the battlefield is no longer just in palaces or parliaments. It's on every person's phone. It's in what appears and what doesn't appear on the screens. And whoever controls the information redefines what is true. More than ever, there seems to be urgency, acceleration, as if something is approaching, a kind of final alignment. Some independent analysts suggest that the next decade will be marked by a clash between these hidden forces. No longer a silent dispute, but a definitive confrontation, an attempt to consolidate control irreversibly. And when that moment comes, no mask will hold. The orders that operated for centuries in the shadows will have to reveal themselves or destroy each other. The fragile balance that has kept the world relatively stable may break. And in that scenario, the common public will not just be spectators. They will be pieces. They will be targets. Recent documents, quietly released by international institutions, suggest a restructuring of global governance. Hybrid models combining financial, political, and technological systems, all based on ancient symbolic codes. Who's proposing these ideas? Who stands to gain if they're implemented? Even official speeches are beginning to show signs of rupture. Terms like new digital order, global transition, collective consciousness are being repeated with unusual frequency. Words loaded with esoteric meaning in ancient doctrines. Are they preparing the ground for something bigger? Or testing the public's reaction before the next step? Amid all this, one question remains. Is this hidden war about to become visible? Or has it already begun and no one noticed? What once seemed like just a theory is starting to take shape as an increasingly plausible scenario. The hidden war between secret orders isn't about ancient beliefs or forgotten rituals. It's about the present. It's in the decisions that reshape economies, in the symbols that mark territories, in the voices that guide cultures. The world is not governed by a single plan, but by silent disputes that shape every choice without most people noticing. This story is just one piece, and one day, you may see the whole puzzle. If this made you think, subscribe and like the video. It helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share, because more voices mean more discoveries.